If the French Third Republic had decided to invade the Kingdom of Belgium before the German Empire did, this would for sure strain relations between the United Kingdom and France, and by extension the United States of America and France. But the question remains, would France invading Belgium in 1914 have helped the Entente defeat the Central Powers sooner, or would it have brought new complications that would ultimately lead to a victory of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire? You will learn all about this in this video. As I said in the intro, the reason why the French did not want to invade Belgium first was simple. If they did, the United Kingdom would not have a casus belli as to join the war on the side of France and Russia. Since its establishment in 1830, Belgium had intended to serve as a buffer state between France and the Netherlands, but mainly as a buffer state between France and Prussia, later Germany. The independence of this kingdom was guaranteed by Great Britain, and if it was attacked by France, this would greatly complicate relations between the British and the French. We also mustn't forget that the Entente was primarily a defensive alliance, and if French troops crossed the border into Belgium, Paris would have become another aggressor, being on par with Germany in terms of aggression, which would influence public opinion both across the Channel and across the Atlantic. In the United Kingdom, neither the people nor the Parliament knew that Britain actually was in a military alliance with France. This may sound very strange, but both Prime Minister Asquith and Foreign Secretary Grey had denied in Parliament that the Entente had been a military alliance. They did this because the people and the Parliament were heavily anti-war and did not wish to get involved in another Franco-German war. So what would happen specifically if France decided to occupy Belgium before Germany? Well, firstly, the United Kingdom would lose their casus belli as to get involved in this new conflict. This would be particularly evident in the moods within the political parties. While the ruling Conservative Party was mostly enthusiastic about helping France against Germany, the Liberal Party was willing to support the French only in the name of protecting Belgium from German aggression. You can probably imagine the risk of a political crisis in the United Kingdom if they were to join the war on the side on who attacked neutral Belgium. The British would begin to financially and materially support the French divisions, plus they would rapidly reduce trade with the Central Powers, but wouldn't join the war officially. Basically, Britain would try to help France indirectly in other ways, but would be uncommitted as to join the Great War. As for the battlefield, the French would have certainly managed to occupy the western part of Belgium. However, I think that crossing the Meuse River would have been very difficult, due to the resistance of the Belgian population and the French light blue uniforms, which made the German artillery even more effective and accurate. On the other hand, all the core French provinces would be under control of Paris, which would allow factories and power plants to be better supplied with coal, which was mined mainly in the northeast of France. Instead of France being occupied, they would be on the offense, so less of their homeland would be destroyed. Even more than 100 years after the Great War, zone rogue is a thing in France, where people are forbidden from entering the zone in red, due to many unexploded bombs and toxic chemicals still being present in the soil. All of this wouldn't happen in this alternate history, or at least not on French soil, as Belgium would be the battleground between France and Germany, so their territory and people would suffer greatly, as they would be dragged into a conflict they had nothing to do with. Initially, the French population would show more enthusiasm, but occupying the claimed area of Alsace-Lorraine would also be represented as a very difficult task. As for the Ottoman Empire, given that the currently inactive Great Britain would be willing to deliver the ordered warships to the Anatolian coast, the chance that the Ottoman Empire would join the war on the side of the Central Powers could be reduced, or at least for the time being. Perhaps in early 1915 both the Ottoman Empire and the British Empire wouldn't be in the war, but it would just delay them eventually joining their respective sides. To understand this, similarly to Greece, in the Ottoman Empire society was divided into two factions, the conservatives who were mostly sympathetic to Germany, while the liberals were more sympathetic to France and Great Britain. I think that the Ottomans could have supported the Central Powers sooner or later. This would probably have happened right after Italy, which has long claimed the Italian population Trentino, Western Slovenia, Istria and Zara, would join the Entente and declare war on the Central Powers. Since it was practically only thanks to Italy, whose invasion was followed by the First Balkan War, which pushed the Turks all the way to Constantinople, that the Ottomans lost control of the Balkan Peninsula. As a result, Sultan Mehmed V would like to take revenge on this Mediterranean state. The United Kingdom would also officially join the war on the side of France, Italy and Russia, after the Ottoman Empire officially joins the war on the side of the Central Powers. The American public opinion, as a result of a democratic France attacking neutral democratic Belgium, would come to view the Entente as the much more aggressive faction. Practically, the Americans would see Belgium as being turned into a war zone, with their people being victims of war crimes by both sides, and their territory being poisoned and greatly destroyed, only because of France. Basically, imagine everything bad that happened to France in the Great War would now happen to tiny and weaker Belgium instead, with barely any French core territories being occupied. As for the Entente being more aggressive than the Central Powers, it's all a matter of viewpoint. Yes, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, while Germany declared war on Russia. But on the other hand, it was Serbian assassins financed by the Serbian government who assassinated the Austro-Hungarian heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand. Both opinions are kind of valid, so propaganda would rage on both sides, regarding who is more in the wrong. This was exactly the mood in American society at the time, but because it was the Germans who were invading neutral Belgium, Germany was clearly seen as the main empire of evil, trying to secure its dominance over the European continent. Now it would be France that would occupy half of Belgium instead, so the opinions in the American society could be split 50-50, making it impossible for the American government to fund both France and the United Kingdom without angering the other 50% of their population. However, I can imagine that they could provide humanitarian aid and non-lethal aid to Belgium through the neutral Netherlands. As for 1915, after Bulgaria's involvement in the war against Serbia, the Serbian and Montenegrin front would quickly collapse, and the Serbian army, led by the Serbian government through family, would have to flee to Albania and then to Italy, where they would continue fighting. Russia would have been supplied through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles for longer, so the Russians would be in a slightly stronger position. On the contrary, Germany would also be in a better position, as Britain wouldn't join the Entente right away, so the British naval blockade would start hurting the German economy a bit later than in our own history. The following year, 1916, marks an unpleasant turn for the Entente. Russia would be forced out of Poland and would have greater difficulty liberating Armenia due to the Ottoman army, which would be better armed thanks to Germany. Italy, after brief occupation of Trentino, begins to lose the Venetian province, just as in our own history. France, with the support of the Flemish and the Walloons, is pushed out of Belgium, but it would still control all of their core provinces. The United Kingdom would manage to conquer most of the German colonies and successfully defend the Suez Canal, but the subsequent Gallipoli campaign ends in the same tragedy as in our own history. This time it angers the even less motivated British and especially Indian, Australian and New Zealand populations even more, forcing the British commanders to go on the defense in order to prevent any future unnecessary loss of life. As for the Easter Rising in Ireland, given that the United Kingdom had joined this world conflict less than a year later, I assume that this revolution would also take place much later, either in the autumn of the same year, when it would no longer be called the Easter Rising, or it would happen as late as the spring of 1917. The American government, led by a kind-hearted president, would probably start sending humanitarian aid there as well. Of course, the name implies that this wouldn't be weapons or ammunition, but medicine, clothing and basic food that would be sent to the Irish and would certainly not be a problem for the British, as this would reduce tensions on the island. For the rest of the year, the British slowly managed to consolidate power over the southern coast of the Arabian Peninsula, while the French successfully repel attacks by the Germans, but the Russians were gradually pushed out of Lithuania and western Latvia. On the other hand, thanks to the Brusilov offensive, they managed to recapture eastern Galicia, which would encourage the Romanians to enter the war on the side of the Entente. Thanks to the fact that the Austro-Hungarian army was initially in a much poorer condition than at the same time in our own history, due to the initially even stronger Russian army, the Romanian army would manage to occupy half of Transylvania, but unfortunately at the cost of losing Wallachia and Dobruja to neighboring Bulgaria. As for the following year, the overthrow of the Tsar would not occur until the fall, thanks to a weaker Austria-Hungary, but the future chain of events would be more or less the same. In the summer of 1917, the German army finally manages to break through the French lines, thus taking control over core territory of France, which in our own history Germany only began to control after the successful implementation of the Schlieffen Plan. Italy, despite minor losses in the Austrian Alps, would be forced to withdraw from most of the Venetian province, except for the city of Venice, while Greece completely lost control of western Thrace and the entire Thessaloniki. Although Greece wouldn't be in the war just yet, there would be a national schism, with the country briefly being split in two, being polarized on which side of the war they should join. Although the British finally succeeded in regaining control of Hejaz and the Sinai Peninsula with the support of Arab rebels, the residents of English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish cities were already beginning to protest the war wildly, as the British casus belli for entering the war would be far weaker than in our own history. After the Romanian army would be pushed out of Transylvania and the Russian one of eastern Galicia, the patience of the poor inhabitants of the Orthodox Empire also begins to run out. Before the spring of 1918, Finland declares independence and the Bolsheviks successfully take control over St. Petersburg, Moscow and other Russian cities. In the spring, Leon Trotsky would conclude the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which means that Russia definitely leaves the Entente. This would start to cause a quiet panic both in the United Kingdom and France. We must not forget that the aftermath of the invasion of neutral Belgium by French troops prevented any sympathy that the Americans might have felt for Western Europe. The German Emperor Wilhelm II would be intelligent enough not to be convinced that under these conditions there is no need to seek new allies across the Atlantic, so he wouldn't have sent a Zimmerman telegram to Mexico to provoke the United States into joining the Entente. Of course I could be wrong, but for the sake of this video I would assume that America would remain neutral, as the people are more polarized on which side of the war they should join, effectively making America not take any decisions as to not antagonize half of their population, so they would wait and see how the war plays out. As for the British and the French, despite the occupation of Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria and Iraq, leading to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, without the American military, slow defeat would have been inevitable. Thanks to the fact that Germany was spared a naval blockade until May 1915, the German economy would be much stronger and the standard of living wouldn't drop as much as during the war. Austria-Hungary would be worse off than in our own history due to a larger Russian army present in Poland. But I don't think that the Habsburg Empire would have collapsed despite the temporary loss of Transylvania, as I think it would have made the Hungarian community even more psychologically determined not to let their historic land be taken from Little Romania. Bulgaria would not capitulate due to the British in Greece being more defensively oriented. I expect that Germany could enter Paris at the end of 1918, which would not immediately mean a French surrender, but would mean a British one, since the entire population would demand an immediate end to the war. Basically, the British public doesn't see the point of the war, as they joined to support France, which violated Belgium's neutrality, while also France joined this war because of Russia, which had already surrendered, so there is no point for the British to keep fighting somebody else's war, so the public pressure would demand that Britain quit the war. In the winter of the following year, after the unsuccessful recapture of Paris, the French government is forced to officially admit defeat, as Russia and Britain are already out of the war, while the United States of America isn't looking to support France in the slightest, and in fact has funded the Belgians indirectly. Italy, which was on the verge of state bankruptcy, would most likely switch sides in order to gain at least French Savoy, Corsica or Tunisia. After all, what can else be expected from this nation? Jokes aside, I think it could have happened, but I think that the Italians would not have declared war on their former allies. They would just withdraw from the war and sign a conditional surrender with the Central Powers. As for the peace conference, this time it would be held in Berlin, where decisions would be made on the new borders, the redistribution of colonies and war reparations. As for the colonies in Asia, the Germans would gain southern Papua New Guinea, plus French Indochina, in which an uprising would occur but would be suppressed by the new German colonial administration. The British wouldn't lose that much, only of their colonies south of Tanganyika, with the exception of South Africa, which would become independent but still remain in the British sphere of influence. Given the surrender of the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire would be allowed to keep its colonies in the Arabian Peninsula. However, the Hejaz, Yemen and Tuman would be annexed into Saudi Arabia for the best possible relations. The defeated Ottoman Empire would be allowed to keep the Caucasus, Palestine, Jordan and Lebanon, plus they would gain the Deccanese Islands from Italy. I can see them even gaining Cyprus, but it depends on the mood in Britain. Under these circumstances, I assume that the Ottoman Sultanate would not have been abolished and that the Kemalist revolutionaries would have been gradually arrested or executed. Bulgaria would practically be in their best position, as they would get off their claimed territories without any major losses, as they would gain Macedonia, Niš province, all of Dobruja, while in Greece Constantine I would return to the throne, restoring the absolutist monarchy. As for Serbia and Montenegro, given that the totally crippled Austro-Hungarian army, I doubt that Charles I would have the manpower to create garrisons in these territories. Serbia and Montenegro would be guarded from within by a secret police, but in practice they would function as independent countries within the Austro-Hungarian sphere of influence and shared market, which is close to the status quo before the war, making the Great War kind of pointless. France, as I said earlier, would lose Indochina and probably the territory north of Belgian Congo, which would be administered by Germany. As for compensation, it would also have to give a Pas-de-Calais province to Belgium, which it was attacking. Unlike the Kaisertum project, however, the French northeastern territories with the largest coal deposits would remain under France, as Germany would need manpower to secure Eastern Europe from the Bolsheviks, who in the meantime would be at war with the Czechoslovak Legion and the White Army in Siberia. Finland would become a constitutional monarchy headed by the German noblemen and a social democratic government, while Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania would form a united Baltic duchy, also ruled by a German nobleman, perhaps Wilhelm Karl von Urach. From the Congress of Poland, the Kingdom of Poland would be created, headed by the Bulgarian noble Cyril I, while the Kingdom of Ukraine would be ruled by Archduke Wilhelm of Austria, also known as the Ukrainian nationalist Vasily Vyshevani. As for Russia, given that there is no Czechoslovakia and probably never will be, the Czechoslovak Legion would have no reason to return home, and it could be immediately arrested as the Legion had fought against Austria-Hungary, trying to defeat their former nation as to create an independent Czechoslovak state. Now the Czechoslovak Legion could remain in Russia or they would go to France, but them returning to their homeland could never happen. In my opinion, under these conditions, the Czechoslovak Legion would remain in Russia, where together with the White Army, they could have been able to consolidate power in Siberia and force the Bolsheviks to conceal an armistice. Unfortunately, I don't think that the Austro-Hungarian monarchy will live up to see another decade or two, as after the death of Charles I in the early 1920s, it would probably break up into Austria-Bohemia, Galicia, which would be divided between Poland and Ukraine, Hungary, which would find itself in a civil war due to the national minorities, and Illyria, which would probably become an Italian protectorate. The worst off would be France, which would literally find itself as the role of Germany from the beginning of the Great War. Meanwhile, I assume that the United Kingdom would adopt an isolationist policy, just like the United States of America. Ireland would be given the status of a partner country with maximum autonomy, and Australia would become an independent parliamentary republic, albeit still oriented to the United Kingdom. I haven't mentioned countries like Japan and Portugal. Japan wouldn't gain anything, but it wouldn't lose anything either. Portugal, given the anti-clerical and anti-Christian government at the time, would face a coup d'etat and the return of the monarchy, albeit this time with a pro-German nobleman, like in Project Kaisertum. The most positive thing that could be said is that there would be no Great Depression, or at worst it would not have such a catastrophic impact on the global economy. There would surely be no ultranationalist Germany, in the worst case only ultranationalist France, Italy and Japan. In that case, the famous axis of revenge could consist of these countries. However, I doubt that they would be able to overwhelm Germany and their new allies, but this is up for interpretation. Belgium, over which the war was fought, would be drastically changed. Belgium would be really devastated and their population would have suffered the most damage per capita. Even in our own history, Belgium had conditions for a famine in 1918, according to this picture, so I would assume that in this alternate history it would be even worse. Belgium's economy would be practically destroyed, so they would rely on French war reparations as to rebuild, and if France were to go down a totalitarian ideology, which is very possible they do with Italy in the 1920s, this could result in the aid to Belgium to be cut, creating for another political crisis in Europe, from which the United Kingdom would be absent, as they would be isolationist. While Russia is perhaps still fighting a civil war, so Germany and their allies could take France and Italy easily if they were to initiate a war. Regardless of the outcome, Belgium would be very much screwed, so they would become very economically reliant on Germany, basically becoming a German client state. On the other hand, Belgium may choose a union with the neutral Dutch, which could include Luxembourg as well. While this is not too likely to happen, the Netherlands got a solid food supply and could rebuild Belgium, but also provide them security in case of the Germans or French were ever to invade the country, which would be a sweet deal for the Belgians to say the least. On the contrary, Germany could still lose the Great War, with the United States of America still supporting the Entente, but no matter how you slice it, Belgium is the loser in both outcomes. In one they would get Eupen-Malmedy and in the other they would gain Nord-Pas-de-Calais, but their homeland would still be greatly destroyed and parts of it would be uninhabitable up until today. I'd say that you check out this video regarding what if Germany invaded Spain in 1940, which I think that you would find really interesting, considering that you have watched this video all the way to the end. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.